Well, hello guys, welcome back to another episode out here under the stars with Nightscape images. And tonight I'm doing a bit of a test of a lens that I've had for a little while now, and I haven't really used it ever for nightscapes. Now you're probably wondering why I would do that. Well, the reason is this is the kit lens that came with my Nikon Z6. It's a 24-70 f4. So tonight I thought I'd come out here to one of my favourite spots and give it a go and put it through its paces and see what it offers us for nightscape images. So you're probably wondering why I haven't used this lens. Well, the reason is because I've been using this one mainly, and that's the 20mm f1.8 lens on the FTZ adapter, as you can see here. Now this lens is on my Z6 probably 90% of the time for my nightscapes. Why? Because I think it's a fantastic lens. It's sharp, it's small, it's light, and I love the 20mm focal length range. A lot of people say to me, why don't you use 14mm or 15mm or 16mm? Well, I do, and I have a 14-24 f2.8 Nikon. I've got a couple of Samyang 14mm f2.8s. I don't really like those lenses. I love the 14-24, don't get me wrong, but this focal range is far better. You know, you get a far less distortion with a longer focal length. For example, 20mm, 24, 35, 50, all of those focal lengths. I love all of those. Having said that, they are a little bit more difficult to get a big shot in nightscapes. Therefore, you do panoramas or you do stitching or whatever. The 20mm, however, is right on that borderline. I think it's just about the right focal length, and that's why I use it so much. But today isn't about the 20mm, it's about the 24. So let's go and have a look and see what we can get out of this lens. Alright, so here we are. I've come to a location that I love to shoot at. You can see behind me this old windmill and tank, which is pretty much on the side of a country road here. In Australia, middle of nowhere, there's a lot of places like this where you can actually get away from the city lights, you can get away from all the other distractions and just shoot these beautiful old structures. I've been here a few times before and always love it. There's hardly any disturbances here, a few cars occasionally along this road, but that's not a problem. One thing I do like is just a little faint glow on the horizon of a little bit of light pollution from a small town, which is probably about 15 or 20 kilometres away from here. But anyway, what we're here to do is to test this 24-70 Z-mount f4 lens on the Z6. So let's get to it. Okay, so I've got my Z6 with the 24-70 f4 lens here, nice and low down to the ground, as I normally like to. It's probably about, I don't know, 600mm off the ground, with my subject matter behind. And the reason I like to do that is because I want to make sure that that windmill and that old tank are silhouetted against the night sky. And when I do some light painting and everything else, that'll bring out the depth and the colour and everything else. But apart from that, there's a big hill a fair way back in the background, and I'm trying to avoid having that intersecting the line of that tank. So sometimes it's impossible to avoid things like that, but I know it's there and I'm just going to try and avoid it if I can. So I've got my camera nice and low down here. I'm going to set this at f4. I'm going to be shooting 15-second shutter speed at ISO 6400 at 24mm, and we'll see how we go. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got the windmill lit so that I can just frame up and do my focusing. Now, one thing I did find with this lens is that focusing is a lot harder than what I'm used to with the 20mm f1.8G lens. Now, the 1.8 has just one single ring on it, which is for focus. This obviously being a zoom lens, it's a 24-70, has a big zoom ring and a very small focus ring. That small focus ring I find to be quite difficult to get accurate focus with. Also, because it's an f4 lens, it doesn't let as much light into the lens and into the sensor to be able to see the difference in focusing. One of the things I did do there was to enable focus peaking. And that's one of the great things with mirrorless cameras, and this Z6 is no exception there. It has really good focus peaking. And in this case, the stars turn to red dots when they're in focus, and that does make it a whole lot easier to focus. So this is looking at focus peaking. So what I'm doing here is zooming in on the back screen, a digital zoom, and you might be able to see the stars there as a red colour. Not sure how easy it is to see. I'm finding it hard to even feel my way with my gloves on. It's quite cold here tonight. You can see I'm moving across the screen there, and you'll be able to see the stars showing as red dots. That's what I'm after. That's called focus peaking. And when the zoom ring is moved and they go out of focus, the colour changes. So they're not red, and then they have a red tinge. As I said to you before, this lens is not so easy to focus, even though at f4 it's more in focus, if that makes sense. So the next thing I'm going to do is make sure I've got the level set on the camera to make sure my horizon is straight. And I do that on these Nikon cameras, just quite a simple process of enabling that little green line and making sure it's level. From there I can make adjustments in post-production if I need to change anything, but that's what I tend to do, even with these single shots. Later on I'm going to be doing some panoramas. It's very vital to get everything straight and level when doing that, but yeah, that's what I always do. Okay, so I think I'm ready to go. I'm going to start off with a single shot just to see how this lens performs. Then I'm going to do a series of stacked images, probably about 8 for the sky, then some light painted foregrounds for the tank and the windmill. After that, I'm going to try it and do a multi-row panorama and see how that goes. So let's get into it. Boy, it's getting pretty cold out here tonight, so I think I might just have a cuppa, warm myself up a little bit. It's supposed to get down to about 1 degree Celsius tonight, and it's certainly well on its way. There's a bit of a breeze happening in the air at the moment, which is actually a bit of a chill factor, which is making that windmill spin a little bit more than I'd really like over there. Never mind, you just roll with the punches. Happy with the shots I'm getting so far, but I'm warming up and then we'll get back out there. That is so nice. You can't beat a good cup of tea on a freezing cold night like tonight. Alright, so while I was here, my intention was to put the 24-70 in the Z6 on top of my tracker, my Skywatcher Star Adventurer. But I put the thing on there, lined it up with the South Celestial Pole, did all the things that I normally do. What happens? I turn it on and bang, it's not working. Now, I've had trouble with this machine before, and I don't know whether it's because it's so cold out here or what it is, but there's no way knowing I can fix it whilst I'm out here, so I'm going to have to put that on hold for the time being. So that's really frustrating, and I feel like throwing this in the gutter over there, but I better not. I'll take it home and see if I can get it going again. Very frustrating. So what's actually happening is when I turn it on, you'll notice these two red lights come on the side, and then after a little while they start blinking. So that's telling me that there's a fault. I don't know what the problem is, but it has happened to me before. I've taken this unit apart, I've put grease and I've freed up all the gears and everything else, taken the batteries out, all of those things, and I've got it working and it's been fine. Hasn't done this for a while, but it's back doing it again. I don't know why. Okay, well, I've got the camera and the lens back here to the car. I'm going to have a good look through the images I've taken and then just make an assessment as to whether I need to take any more. So let's have a look now. Okay, so there we go. Oh, I'm pretty happy with that. That's the single shot I took at the beginning, and I know you won't be able to see this clearly, but it looks pretty good when you zoom in on the areas of the shot. So yeah, I think that one will be all right. Now, as you can see here, there's quite a number of the same shot, and these are about 8 different ones that I intend to stack. These are shot at 15-second shutter speed at ISO 6400 f4. You can see the white balance there is set to 4000 Kelvin, and I shot 8 of those. From there, I then light painted some foreground shots, as you can see here, and I'll work out which of those are the best that I want to use. Now they were shot at f5.6 at ISO 800, 15-second exposures, also at a 4000 Kelvin white balance. Well, I'm actually really pleased with all of those shots that I've looked at there. After that, I shot a 3-row panorama, and I had the settings the same as the single shot. So I was shooting at f4, ISO 6400, white balance of 4000 Kelvin, and the shutter speed of 15 seconds. Now I shot, I think, 9 images in total. I might not need all of those 9. Well, we'll see how it goes. So I think the thing that I want to do now is, I'm a bit disappointed with that tracker that I couldn't get that working, because I was really wanting to see how sharp these images would have been on the Milky Way chord there, but never mind. As a bonus, what I might do is actually take all of these images back home to the computer and take you through how I'm going to process the images. So that's our next step. Let's go. Well, here we are back in the studio, and I'm going to take you through the edits of each of those images that we shot last night. Now, the windmill was spinning a fair bit because of the wind, and the wind was freezing, so it was very, very cold last night. But I'm pretty happy with the results so far. So I'm just going to start off with the single shot, then I'm going to go through the stacked and layered images, and then finally I'll do the panorama, and we'll just see how that all pans out. So let's have a look. Alright, so here we are in Lightroom, and I've opened up to the single image that I took of our subject matter, and you can see there, that's just how it looks. There's an aeroplane in the middle. I've got to get rid of that. But initially, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase the exposure a little bit and the contrast, drop down the highlights to about 24, up the whites to about 19. Then I'm going to go down to the profile corrections, which I'll enable. Now, because this lens is not recognized, I just punch in Nikon and it comes up with a Nikon lens. I'm not 100% that's the correct lens. It says it's a 105mm f1.4 lens, but anyway, I'm not going to worry too much about that. The next step is noise reduction. I'm going to definitely put noise reduction into this. And on this Z series, I've noticed that I always enable a color noise reduction. I never used to do this on the D750, but I definitely have noticed there's more color noise in the Z6. Having said that, it operates at a higher ISO than the D750, but the color noise is a bit of an issue. The other thing I tend to do with the Z6 is increase the tint away from the green a little bit, just a touch, because I find that there's sometimes just a little bit too much green. Now, this image isn't too bad, but some of them I've noticed, especially the yellow, doesn't look so yellow, it looks more green. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I don't mind the lighting. Remember, this is just a single shot, so I ran from both sides of the image and lit it from both sides, as you can see from here. Now, one thing I am going to do to work on this sky is I'm going to add a graduated filter and drag it down from the top about there, roughly, so that it basically covers the whole sky and gradually fades off at the bottom. And what I'm going to do here is enable the exposure setting and add some exposure so it brightens that sky a little bit, probably about that much. Just a touch of contrast and also a touch of dehaze. Now, you'll notice when you do the dehaze, it makes the sky pop, and that's why I'm adding a little bit more exposure, because I don't want to lose the intensity of that Milky Way. But what it has also done is change the color refraction. And so what I'm going to do here now is actually go down here to this little color panel, click on that, and actually click into the yellow refraction. And what that will do is, as you can see, it's adding just a touch of color there. So in other words, this is what it looks like without it, and that's what it looks like with it. So it's added a fair bit of color there. Now, that's probably about the color I think it needs to be. You will all have your own preferences for this, so I'm just going to go with that. Now, one thing I do want to get rid of is that aeroplane trail. So I'm going to zoom in on that, and you can see Lightroom isn't the best for removing aeroplane trails, but I'm going to do that by using this spot removal tool. I'm just going to basically draw over it like that, and that hopefully will copy from somewhere else. As you can see, it has done. Looks all right. Click off that. It's copied a star, but in the big picture you won't notice that. So essentially, there we have our image, Not many adjustments have had to have been done. You can see what I've done here in the basic panel. And if I go full screen by pressing F on the keyboard, you can see that's what our single image looks like. And it's actually not too bad. Remember, this is shot at 24mm at f4, ISO 6400, and it's a 15-second exposure. Alright, so that single shot doesn't look too bad. So our next step is to compare that with the stacked images and the layered images, and I'm going to do that now. So let's get into that. Alright, so our next job is to layer these sky, and I'm going to stack them in Sequator. So here we have one of the 8 images. I've done the adjustments already. You can see I've increased the exposure a fair bit. Whites, dropped the highlights, a little bit of contrast. I've also gone down to the lens corrections, and I've enabled remove chromatic aberration and enabled profile corrections. But what I haven't done is adjusted any noise reduction. It's all on 0. Oh, except for the color. I did add a little bit of color noise reduction. So anyway, let's go back to the top here. Now, I took 8 shots that were exactly the same. So I want to copy all the settings. So I'm just going to hold shift on the keyboard and click on the last one, then go over here and press the sync button, check all, synchronize, and you can see there that now all of those images are copied. The settings are exactly the same. So my next step is to copy all of those out as TIFF files. So to do that, I go up to File, Export, and you can see I've selected a folder here already because I've already done this to save time. Stacked Sky TIFF, so I've called it image format TIFF. Compression none, no watermark or anything like that. Press export, and I have now exported those to a folder. My next job is to go to Sequator, so let's do that. Open up Sequator, looks like this. Double click Star Images, and what that's going to ask me for is all of the images, and you can see here the folder is opened up. There's 8 of them there. These are TIFF files, and I click open, and now the next thing that it's showing one of the files there, by the way. The next thing it's going to ask me to do is, if I had dark frames, I'd put them here under noise images. I don't have any of those, I'm not going to. It's going to ask me where I want to output that file to, so I'm double click on that. And I want to output it back to the same folder I just created. But I'm going to call it Sequator Sky Stack, just so I can remember which one's which out of all of those when I finish. Now we go to down the bottom here where it says Composition Align Stars. Click on that. I want to click the Align Stars tab here. I also want to click Select Best Pixels, and I'm going to slide that right across to the end. Down here, Freeze Ground. Now that's really important. I'm going to click that. Also, I'm going to click this Selective tab right there. So that's all I've done in that tab. Now I'm going to click the Sky region, and I want to click the Irregular Mask dot here. And what that enables you to do is to right click over the image and rub out the sky. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm holding down the, left mouse click. I think I said right before, I mean left mouse. I'm doing a left mouse click and rubbing out the sky. Now this is a little bit tricky because this particular subject matter has some fine features around this windmill, and you can see I'm just going around it as best I can. The tools in Sequator are fairly simple and fairly basic, so I can't make that erasing tool any smaller than that, so I've just got to do my best, and I can't zoom in on the image, so I've just got to try and get in there as best I can and not go over the actual background image, because what it's doing here is making it so that I can freeze the foreground. So what I'm rubbing out is the sky, and what I'm not rubbing out is the foreground. And because I'm not rubbing the foreground out, it's going to freeze it, which is fantastic. To do this in Photoshop, you're there for absolutely hours just trying to get everything lined up and then adding foregrounds to the backgrounds. It's quite a tedious task, and I think this is far better. So just go around these trees. I'll do a little bit there. Now, if I right click, I can actually paint that back in. So if I went over the edges there, which I possibly did, I can put it back in, and you can see I'm doing that right here. Now up here is a bit tricky. I've had trouble before when I've tried to go around really fine cables and things like what we've got here. So we'll just do our best and see what we can come up with. So as you can see, I'm just rubbing all that out and getting as close as I can to the framework here. Now the windmill there is difficult because it's just all spokes, and which is pretty much impossible for me to get in there and do that. So I'm just going to do my best. Remember, I'm actually doing this with the intention of layering some images that I shot for the foreground in to cover a lot of these bits and pieces here. Those of you on a Mac will be using a program called Starry Landscape Stacker, which is a similar interface, a little bit different, but it does exactly the same thing, and it's a very good program. Alright, so once I get to this stage, I press Start down here, and you will see it only takes a very short time to stack all of those images together and freeze the foreground. Okay, so it's successfully completed. 1 minute and 13 seconds that took. Considerably quicker than Photoshop would do. And there it gives us a bit of a preview of what this stacked image looks like. So I'm done here with Sequator. I'm going to now go back to Lightroom. So I'm going to close this program down. That image has been saved, the stacked image, in the folder I sent it to. I'm going to open up Lightroom. I'm going to now concentrate on my foreground. So here we have the first foreground shot. Now I shot this at f5.6, ISO 800 at 24 millimeters, 15-second exposure. It's very sharp, really sharp. That's one thing I would say about this lens, is it's sharp, really, really sharp. Have a look at that. And that's the reason I like to stop down the lens, because I want to get that clarity and that sharpness in the image. Remember, I'm not using the sky part of this image because that's what that other stacked one was for I just did. Okay, now the edits, I've done them to save time. I've added some exposure, a little bit of contrast, dropped the highlights, added a bit of whites. Now I've added some of this new texture slider, which is fairly new in Lightroom. I'll put plus 50 on that because I like what it does. I normally add clarity, but this texture slider, I just like the look of it, so I'm going to give it a go. Now I've gone down to lens corrections, and I've added both the profile correction and the remove chromatic aberration, noise reduction, and I will add a bit of noise reduction here. Just there might be a touch of noise in there, and it's such a sharp image I can afford to lose a touch with that, and I like the look of that. So what I'll do now is click on the other images, and I've already done this to save time, that I want to use, which I lit the pillar underneath the tank, and I also shot a view with just the light on the back of the tank. Now I've dropped the highlights a bit on this one because I thought it was a little bit hot, so just to make sure that looks good. Now what I'm going to do is just select, by holding down Control, those three items, right click, goes up here to Edit In, and right down the bottom, Open as Layers in Photoshop, and I'm clicking on that. What's going to happen now is Photoshop is going to open here, as you can see, and it's going to open those three images as separate layers. And then I'm going to bring in the stacked sky image, blend them all together, and we'll continue on. Okay, so as you can see, we've got the three layers here, one on top of the other, and whichever layer is on the top is the one you're looking at. So you can go down and look at them underneath each other. There they are. Next job is to bring that stacked sky in. So here we go, File, Open, and I need to go to where the folder is, and let me think, where is it? Let me just find it. June 2019, lens test, here we go, stacked sky, there we go, that one there. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste that into my other project here. So I just Control A to select it, Control C to copy it. You can do the same up here under Edit. Close that, and then Control V to paste it in. Again, I can go to Edit and paste up there. It's the same thing. Now you'll notice that's coming on top of the stack. I'm going to drag that down to the bottom, as you can see here. Now, to do a quick preview of what this is going to look like, I'm just going to select the top three layers by holding down Shift and clicking on the top and then the bottom, and change my blend mode from normal to lighten. And that gives you a bit of a preview of what's in store. Now before I go any further, I'm just going to put a layer mask on that top layer because I want to get rid of all these stars. You can see the stars there? I don't want them. Everything else I want. So I'm going to add a layer mask by clicking down the bottom here. See the mask appears. I'm selecting my brush tool here, make sure my opacity is at 100, go up to my brushes, and I'm going to deliberately select a hard brush here, and I'll show you what I'm doing. The reason I'm selecting a hard brush is because it's quicker to erase big parts of the sky. So I'm making that brush a little bit bigger, and you can see I'm just simply rubbing out all of the stars. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm using the light and blend mode. And when you're using a light and blend mode, anything that's light pixels will show through to the layers underneath, and anything that's dark pixels will disappear. And that's why I'm not being very fussy about the edges here, as you can see. And you can see I'm just going in to get rid of the dots that I can physically see. There's not many, there's a few there, but not many. And you can see I'm also deliberately not being overly fussy with this. See, this is one of the advantages of shooting this at f5.6. I'm not actually capturing many stars. If you have a real close look, you won't see many stars in there at all. All right, now you think that's a dog's breakfast at the moment, but watch what happens when I turn that bottom layer back on. Suddenly, beautiful. We can see the background stars, and we don't have any problems with those other errant stars that I've just rubbed out. So that's pretty good. What I might do there is simply copy that layer to the next layer down. So to do that, I just click on the layer mask, hold down Alt on the keyboard, and drag it down. And you can see that's copied over the top of the other one because the stars are the same in all three shots. And I'll do the same thing on that next layer, Alt, drag down. And then when I enable this bottom layer, you can see now we have all three layers stacked one on top of each other. And from there, we can create whatever we want to do. We can mask out bits and pieces. We can make it a little bit less obvious. For example, that layer there is the back of the tank, you can see. This layer here is highlighting underneath the front. Now what I think might look good on that top layer is actually, it's a little bit over bright, I think. There's a number of ways you can do this, but what I'm going to do is add an adjustment layer on that, and it's going to be an exposure adjustment layer. I'm going to pin it to the top layer by pressing that little box there. So now that is pinned to this layer, and what I'm going to do with that, sorry, let's get it back up again, is drop down the level of the exposure. And see how I've dropped that down? So that's made the whole layer darker. There's a number of ways you can do this, but this is how I want to do it because I want to actually rub a little bit more of that brightness of that windmill back in. That's why I put a layer mask on here. So select my brush again. I'm going to get a soft brush this time and change the opacity down to about, I don't know, let's say about 50%. And then all I have to do now is just see how I can rub brightness back into the image by just painting over the bit that I want to be brighter. Now a lot of this I don't want to be brighter, but if I did, see, I can actually create little bits that are a bit brighter, and I like that. I like the fact that you can do this, and this is another way of adjusting the opacity of the layer, but selectively, rather than just go up and change the opacity, which is what a lot of people would do. I can brush in the bits that I want to be a little bit brighter, and it's reversible, obviously, because it's a layer mask. That's subtle, I know it's subtle, but I just wanted to show you that. So that's with, and that's without. You see the difference? I've just taken some of the heat out of the image. I don't mind a bit of heat up here in this because that's really a feature of what we're trying to do, and I don't mind a little bit there, just to draw the eye. Now, the only other thing I want to do to this is add an adjustment layer to the sky. So I'm going to do that by clicking down here and adding a curves adjustment layer. And you can see here, if I play around with this here, it will increase the brightness there and decrease the brightness there. In other words, I'm putting contrast into the sky, but I'm not adjusting any of the foreground elements of the image. It's only the background. And you can see that's been a really subtle adjustment, but when I turn it off, you can see what it looks like. So that's a little bit flat, that's a little bit more punchy. And I like it. I like it more punchy. So I might just leave that where it is there. Zoom in on the image, you can see that it's sharp. The tank is sharp. The background sky isn't noisy, and that's what I was after. The windmill looks great. Now, if you look at the corners, a lot of people ask about corner sharpness. Now, there's a little bit of streaking there, and I think that's mostly due to the fact that I shot this at 15-second shutter speed, and I think that's a little bit too long for a 24mm lens. I would normally shoot it at 10 seconds, but I was quite aware that shooting with this lens at f4, I didn't have enough brightness. That's why I went a little bit longer. Now when you look at the big picture, it looks fine. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is flatten this image. I do that because I get massive file size. That's 686 megabytes. It's way too big. I don't want to keep that. So I'm going to go down here under layer, flatten image, and you can see now it's just one layer. It's down to 139 megabytes. I'm going to close out of Photoshop. It's asking me if I want to save the changes. I press yes. And what that will do now is open up this layered and stacked image into Lightroom, and you can see there it is right there. Click on full screen by clicking F on the keyboard, and there we have our image, and I think that looks pretty incredible. Well, I'm absolutely wrapped with how that's come up. Now, one thing I can tell you about this 24-70 f4 Nikon Z lens is it's absolutely sharp. It's sharp right across the frame. I already knew that for daytime use, but for a kit lens, it's awesome. So for nightscapes, what's my assessment of the lens? Well, it does a pretty good job, as you can see here, but I think the reason it does a good job is because it's matched up with a really, really good body. The Nikon Z6 is awesome for nightscapes. You can push the ISO. It's not as noisy as other camera bodies with an f4 lens. So, you know, I'm used to using an f1.8 lens, even f2.8 lenses, which allow a lot more light to come in than this lens does. But as you can see, it's performed pretty well once the edits have been done. A little bit harder to shoot in the field. I found it harder to focus with, as I mentioned earlier. But overall, it's quite an acceptable lens for nightscapes. I think I'm really looking forward to the new Z mount 20mm f1.8. That will be an absolute killer lens. All right, well, thanks very much again for joining me. I'd love you to leave some comments down below, and give me a like if you like the video. Give me a thumbs down if you don't like the video. That's okay as well. I appreciate this is a bit longer than some of my videos, but you can't keep the post-processing parts short. Anyway, if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, please do so. I'd love you to do that. Always happy to chat. So until next time, I'll see you guys out under the stars soon.